Okay, everybody, please take your seats. We'd like to welcome you this morning to very sunny and hot Brussels, the way it is all the time now. Um, Thank you very much for being here. I'm Peteris Zilgalvis of the unit that now is called Digital Innovation and Blockchain. So we even have blockchain in the title in the digital single market. And I'm also co-chair of the FinTech Task Force, joined by my team from our unit and also from the e-government unit here in the Commission. And during the day, you'll have the time to meet all of them, as well as myself, who will return. I do have to leave for a meeting with our commissioner in a few moments, but I'm very glad to welcome you on behalf of the Digital Single Market Directorate and the European Commission here. We have two groups who are, I think, very mutually synergistic today. We have the people, the experts and stakeholders of the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum, which is this European Parliament pilot project launched and managed by the European Commission, by our unit. And we also have the European Blockchain Partnership, which are the European Union member states and Norway that have signed the Blockchain Declaration this year on the 10th of April. We also have the very good news that the three remaining member states who had not signed yet, Hungary, Croatia, and Italy has already joined us here today, have indicated that they're in the process of preparing for signature. So we'll have a full coverage of all the member states, also including the UK still, and also Norway, and so maybe also eventually some other EEA, EFTA states. It's open to them as well, which is why our Norwegian friends were joining and working for a European continental blockchain here, or at least on, how to say, this half of the continent. Just a few words about this blockchain partnership for those of you from the Observatory and Forum, so that you know who you have the chance to engage with today and why this meeting is so important. The idea of the partnership is to identify use cases for cross-border public services on blockchain already by September. So this is also a very important meeting. We've discussed between ourselves, the Commission and the member states, some of these, but also we would like to have input from the Observatory and Forum and some of you here today who are presenting use cases. And by the end of December, to have the functional characteristics, functional specifications of those use cases in order to launch, start the launch of some public services, 1, 2, or 3. That's what we have to see what is possible already next year. This would be in the framework most likely of the Connecting Europe facility. And then we also have resources foreseen in the next Digital Europe program, DAEP, in the MFF, in the Multi-Annual Financial Framework. Sorry for all the acronyms, but at least I'm trying to read them out. The next budget, I mean, for how to say the normal world. We should have substantial funding available there for blockchain. And the idea is precisely, and I underline, we're not carried away by the hype, where it is more useful to use blockchain, where there is a clear benefit, and maybe especially for us as a community of 28 and more states with the EEA and EFTA, where we can share information, do regulatory reporting, ideally in the future with real-time capabilities. Then let's use these opportunities where it's better to just have a centralized database or databases. Let's use that. The idea is very much to have a mix of the correct technologies and have them chosen both in the context by the member states or by a procurement. So this is the background. We're very glad to have you here today. We're very glad to have the colleagues from the Observatory and Forum. And with that, I think that the ceremonial words are enough, and we can start really going into the use cases. Please feel free to ask questions, to make comments. This really is a time of deepening our knowledge and moving forward as Europe based on evidence and best practice. While I'm away at a meeting with our Commissioner, Maria Gabriel, I think we'll have Chiara Mazzone on my right taking over from the Digital Innovation and Blockchain team, but you'll also meet the other members of the Commission team. And so I'll hand over now to Ken Timsit from the Blockchain Observatory and Forum, who will introduce the first part of the agenda and how the use cases will be presented. And I'll see you back here soon.
Thanks, Peteris. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ken, and I'm a member of the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum. The EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum is an initiative that was launched by the European Commission in February of this year, and that is going to last for 2 years. The forum has 3 objectives. First, to create a repository, a knowledge repository open to citizens that talks about, open to citizens who want to learn about blockchain technology, its underpinnings, and its use cases. The second objective is to identify framework conditions that will accelerate blockchain innovation in Europe. The European Commission believes that there is a window of opportunity for Europe to take the lead, and also to do this in the context of creating more single markets across the Union. And the third objective is to identify high priority use cases that the EU and the member states can work on together to drive adoption of blockchain technology, particularly in government services. So there have been other workshops of the forum before, one on one to draw a diagnostic of blockchain innovation in Europe, and another one to talk about GDPR. But today's workshop is really critical because, as you can see, it relates directly to 2 of the 3 objectives of the forum, namely to identify framework conditions and policies that can accelerate innovation, and to identify high priority use cases in government services. And in terms of the impact of today's workshop, it's also very clear and short term because whatever is discussed today will feed the discussion within the blockchain partnership of the member states, and will feed the discussion starting in September on projects that member states will launch together. So it's very exciting, and we have a very interesting agenda. I will start with a short introduction of what we are talking about today and how we are framing the conversation. Then we have 2 deep dives into use cases. The first one is the use of blockchain for land registries, and the other is the use of blockchain for VAT systems. Each session will have a short presentation, followed by discussion and questions from the audience. Then we'll go for lunch. Lunch is not going to take place here. It's going to take place at the cafeteria, the ground floor, on the 4th floor. We will give out vouchers. We will ask you to eat quickly and be back on time since we have a busy afternoon. So when you are back on time at 1 p.m., we'll have subsequent discussions, right? So we have a discussion about infrastructure foundations and particularly presentations about what Estonia is doing and what is the current thinking on blockchain platform as a service as offered by governments. Then we'll have a panel discussion on e-identity with several industry actors and academics. This is very exciting. And finally, we'll try to wrap up and form a tentative conclusion as to what it is that we are recommending to the European Commission and the European Parliament. Are there any questions? If you need to ask questions, you need to press the button on your microphone. So Chiara has an additional comment.
Yes, for
You
the
want to introduce yourself quickly as well?
yes, Chiara Mazzone, working with Peteris, Zilgalvis, Bruno, and other colleagues in the Commission DG Connect, Digital Innovation and Blockchain Unit. So, a small comment for the representative of member states. Can you just raise your hand so that we know where you are, more or less? Okay, very well. You're well dispatched around the room. Just for you, I'm sorry the day will be a bit longer, so we will have a coffee break around 10 to 4, and we will ask you to stay for an extra hour or hour and a half, the time to have also discussions after the very fruitful workshop that we will be having during this day. So thank you very much for your patience. It will be a long day, but a very fruitful one.
And for those who are not members of the states, some words of explanation. So there is the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum, which is a research and analysis initiative spearheaded by the European Commission, and that's what's happening now. Separately, but very closely related, there is the Blockchain Partnership, which is an initiative announced by the member states at the Digital Day back in May. And so this is happening between the member states and is closely related, but that's the second part of the day that Chiara is talking about. All right, any question? All right, let's start. Government services. We're talking about experiments or large-scale deployments by public or private actors to use blockchain, usually as a way to make government services more efficient, but sometimes with other additional goals in mind, such as transparency, auditability, or a creation of fairer or more transparent single markets. One of the objectives of the forum is, as I mentioned, to create a knowledge repository. And one very important component of that repository is the EU blockchain map. It is a map of blockchain initiatives all across Europe, whether they are government initiatives, private initiatives, startups, or token launches. And you can find that map on our website, eublockchainforum.eu. And then you click on map, or you click directly, or you type the URL that appears at the bottom left corner of the slide on the screen. Why am I highlighting that? Because the map is never complete. It's a lot of work, obviously, but also there are new projects starting every day. I'm sure that most of you in this room are involved in some of those projects, and so we really encourage you to click on the link, click on Add a Project, Add to Map, and then add to the map the projects that you are currently working on. They will subsequently be displayed on the map of EU blockchain. So there are many initiatives going on, and we are, for the purpose of today's discussion, we are framing those initiatives and classifying them into three main categories. So next slide. What are those categories? The first category is, well, clearly use cases, right? So use cases are user journeys or citizen journeys that we are addressing and transforming or simplifying thanks to blockchain technology. The list that we have here is by no means exhaustive or comprehensive, but represents a good list of what we see most frequently among member states in terms of topics that they're working on when related to blockchain. I will get into that list a little later and explain what is in there. The second type of projects or initiatives is what we call infrastructure foundations. Infrastructure foundations are not citizen journeys, right? So they are not targeted at a specific process or experience that we're trying to transform, but they are foundations that enable other use cases and are generally usable across multiple use cases. I will, again, discuss in more detail what we mean by that, but this includes, for example, identity solutions, something that we call blockchain platform as a service, which simply means the creation of a cloud infrastructure where people can quickly and easily deploy blockchain networks, and the tokenization of fiat currencies to enable payments in official currencies as part of blockchain processes, blockchain-based processes. And thirdly, we have some initiatives which are neither use cases or technological foundations, which are just policies and regulation. They can be adaptation or clarification of existing policies. They can be new policies or regulations, or they can be public or public/private initiatives that drive blockchain adoption. So today we're going to talk about all of those things, but particularly number 1 and number 2, which are extremely important and that can only be tackled properly with an esteemed group of experts as the one that I have in front of me today. So use cases, next slide. So what did we mean by the various categories that we mentioned? Again, it's not comprehensive. It is a list of the most frequently listed use cases of blockchain in government. So the first one, we call it titles and registration. So it's everything about the authentication of certificates, titles, land registries, company registries, using the blockchain as a source of authentication and auditability. The second use case is healthcare, and specifically the use of blockchain to orchestrate the use of medical data, patient data, anonymously, of course, but in particularly, using this data to make it available to research projects or clinical trials that may need access to this data, or even policymakers. Third use case, we call it government funding. That's all about the transparency of government subsidies and expenses. So transparent records of spending and transparent funneling of subsidies through bank accounts to beneficiaries and ultimately to the places where those funds are used for purchases, to have a precise accounting of how many funds are at the beginning of the process and how many funds end up in the hands of the beneficiaries. Number 4 is supply chain and traceability. This is an obvious use case when you're talking about blockchain, right? As everyone shares a synchronized copy of the same registry of data, you can use that registry to track goods and merchandise, know in real time what is their process, where they're coming from, and where they're going. There are various trials underway in many parts of the world to use blockchain for food traceability, one in China and one with the World Wildlife Fund, for example. Number 5 is about taxation and excise, and in particular what we mean by that is using blockchain to simplify the reconciliation of tax and excise records of multiple countries, right? So if some countries expect VAT and some countries are foregoing VAT for cross-border purchases, you need to make sure that the VAT that has been foregone is the same amount as the VAT that is charged by other countries. And today, the management of those cross-border transactions and taxations is wasting a lot of time and resources that could be potentially saved thanks to blockchain. Number 6 is the use of blockchain for voting. Obviously, the idea is not to put our votes transparently on a blockchain for everyone to see, but it is to make use of certain properties of the blockchain to make sure that votes are all accounted for and that they are counted in real. Hello? Hello, hello. Okay. And that they are counted in real time. There was a anecdotal example of that. Anecdotal in the sense that it wasn't really yet critical, but a few weeks ago in Switzerland, in Zug, the local canton organized a voting session that allowed citizens to log into the voting system using a blockchain identity and vote through an electronic portal. So that's a precursor of things to come in the future. And lastly, payments and settlements. So this use case is not directly related to government services. It is more related to central banks and central financial regulators, which nevertheless are part of the realm of government services. A good example of that is what Singapore and Canada have started. Right? So they have started to work on tokenizing their fiat currency. Here, the idea is not at all to start dealing with cryptocurrencies, not at all. The idea is simply to create a digital existence for the traditional currencies, as we're already doing with e-money or other types of electronic currencies. And once this currency has a digital existence on the blockchain, you can use those tokens to settle interbank payments. And you can also settle trade finance transactions that are operated by smart contracts. So those are a few examples. I'm sure that in this room you have many other use cases that you'd like to push and explain. And please take the advantage of today to do just that. Infrastructure foundations, very important, especially since we believe that when it comes to driving blockchain innovation in Europe, the European Union is not going to do everything. But if member states and the Union can set up some foundations that everyone can leverage, then many more projects can be accelerated without the direct involvement of government authorities. By foundations, we mean at least three things, and perhaps there are others. The first one, as I said, is an identity layer. Today, on most public blockchains, transactions are pseudo-anonymous, meaning that they can be traced back to an address, but who that address is in the real world is not known. And to be honest, this is not something that was created by design, right? So it is not the desire of all blockchain companies to keep all blockchain applications pseudo-anonymous. The fact that you can trace transactions back to their original address means that if and when governments are ready to link those addresses to real identities, it will be possible to authentify many things on the blockchain, of course, while maintaining the privacy of user identity and the privacy of personal data. So that's a very important foundation. Some government entities, like the canton of Zug, have started to work on this topic, but we are still many years away from a coherent, interoperable identity infrastructure. And we have a whole session this afternoon to talk about that. The second foundation that we often see is called blockchain platform as a service. As I mentioned earlier, this is a sort of regulated or government-sanctioned network of cloud servers which have instances of various blockchain technologies made available to users. In some situations, governments have set up such cloud infrastructure because they want government agencies to be able to experiment with blockchain without having to start an RFP and hire a vendor and create a network from scratch every time that they want to launch a proof of concept. So that's a very interesting potential accelerator of blockchain adoption. And the third foundation, like I mentioned, is what we call tokenized fiat currencies. The idea is simply if you get to a world where you're using smart contracts to trigger payments in real time for government services or for trade, then you need those payments to be in some kind of real currency. It can't be in Bitcoin. And this is only possible if there are some forms of tokens backed by financial institutions or by central banks that have the same value as the fiat currency. Again, we are not talking about cryptocurrencies at all here. We're simply talking about giving a digital existence to currencies, as is already the case with e-money, electronic bank accounts, e-payments, and other means of payment. And finally, we will talk a little bit less because it's not the core focus of the forum, but we should, if there are important regulatory implications to what we're saying, we should definitely identify them, whether there are modifications or clarifications of existing rules or new rules. So please come up with ideas and suggestions, and they will be duly recorded.